Well, maybe we can start. Thank you all for coming. This is the second webinar of the Ponderful project. Today we have with us the Dr. Paulo Mormul. He's a professor and a researcher of ecology at the State University of Maringá in Brazil. His interests focus mainly on biology, on the biology of animal and plant invasions and how they can affect biodiversity and the ecosystems. But he's also interested in understanding trophic interactions in shallow lakes and the effects on their stability. Most of his field work is carried out in the floodplain of the Upper Panama River in the Itaipu Reservoir in Brazil. Thank you so much, Dr. Roger, for accepting this invitation and for sharing with us your work. So now I'll leave you with him. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa. Thank you, everyone, to come to listen me. I'll try to show you something we are working with biological invasions, but I prepared a talk mostly regarding biological invasions in general. So we can talk a little bit more specifically regarding my studies, maybe after the talk. So to start, I prepared the talk with the title, The World We Created and the Planet We Want, from a freshwater perspective. So when we are talking about the world or the global change, for example, we usually listen many different words that are related to this mechanism, these processes, and two of them are critically or can clearly point what we can see in the environments, the imbalance and the human activities. So human activities for me is one of the most important things that are pressuring ecosystem and particularly freshwater ecosystems. But also we have a long history of pressures and this is the human contribution to environments we have today. So we can see in the image some of the human contributions to the world. It is like a legacy that we are a long time posing to humans and other species. But most of these contributions are related to the population expansion, land conquest, and this is related to exploitation of natural resources. So we need to use the natural resource to build, to eat, and to wear everything we need. We use some natural resource to prepare. And this kind of interaction between the humans and nature is intensified since a long time ago. And so the world we created is now kind of unnatural environmental conditions that we can face when we travel around, or if at least we access some news. Okay. And we can see that the world is indeed unbalanced. So these changes affect not only freshwater, but also terrestrial ecosystems, but particularly for the freshwaters, we can see that the use of freshwater ecosystem was intensified, and we have a classical challenge regarding aquatic ecology that is face the unnatural condition in freshwaters, like a cultural eutrophication that is basically a result of human activity. So with our activities, we increase nutrients in fresh waters, and it changes physical, chemical, and biological attributes in these environments. So we have a healthy ecosystem, and here in the image, in the left, and the eutrophic ecosystem in the right, and we can see that the species are lost in the right side when we have a eutrophic ecosystem. So this is a classic challenge, but it gets worse when we face new environmental conditions like climate change or global change we are having now. So if you take a look in the feedbacks we can have when we put together the human activities that cause eutrophication, we also can see that human activities are causing the global change. And these global changes, like climate warming, changing precipitation, can increase the nutrient loads, for example, to freshwater environments, and also affect water level and residence time in this ecosystem. Here we can see that we have many kinds of feedbacks in the lakes, and this can get worse if you think that with eutrophication we can increase floating vegetation, we can have a decrease in submerged vegetation, and also we can have an increase of cyanobacterial blooms. The frequency of cyanobacterial blooms could increase. So this kind of change will affect all the dynamics in fresh waters, and this can also restructure the ecosystem functioning and also the services provided by this kind of ecosystem. But not only climate change affect the eutrophication, but also eutrophication can affect climate change. So when we have eutrophication process, for example, we have feedbacks to climate change. You can see here in this figure that we have some pathways that can increase, for example, greenhouse gas emission, but also we can see that we have here more small bentivorous fish. That is a process of we call bentification, when you have a transformation in the trophic web from the I forgot the word, sorry. When we have a trophic cascade, a classical pelagic one, and these changes in species cause a process of bentification, or the change of pelagic trophic webs to food webs to benthic food webs. So these also have impacts in how fish are distributed, in biomass and number, and it can change how the ecosystem is functioning. I also included here some aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals, just to show that if we have eutrophication combined with climate change, we can have problems to reach these three examples of Sustainable Development Goals, considering the freshwater environments. So here, considering, for example, fish as a source of food, and also the water that we need, clean water, but also considering that we need to fight climate change. We need actions to prevent or to limit climate change. And in this scenario, we can't do that. We are increasing climate change, we are increasing hunger in this scenario, and also we don't have the clean water. So this scenario is like, how can I say, it is special for the biological invasions. Because when we have this scenario, we have a vulnerable environment. And this kind of vulnerability is used by biological invaders. So yes, it can get worse and worse when we think about biological invasion in this kind of scenario that we have today. So if we think that changes in environmental conditions can facilitate biological invasion, it is a fact. So just to show you here, we have like some filters that can prevent the invasions, but many of these filters are changed when we have, for example, eutrophication, climate change, and also if we consider other human activities. The first one is the biogeographic filter that is easily avoided by the invaders when human travel, human trade over the world. So human introductions are increasing the potential of biological invasion because we can transport species from side to side in the world and help these species to pass this filter. And the second one is the physiological filter. The physiological filter is basically related to environmental condition when the species reach a new site. So these conditions are changed when we have the eutrophication. And climate change also alter these natural conditions, and together this can boost the invasion of many, many species. So here you can see in the right side that we have some species, like 10 species that can be filtered in biogeographic filter, but now with human activities, we have some species that can pass from the biogeographic filter, physiologic filter, and have success in the invasion. This scenario is like a global change also, and this is also considered a global change, the biological invasions. And it is because humans changed so much how species are distributed. And if we take a look in how human travel over the world, across continents, for example, we can have an expectation that a species can appear in some places, and sometime we can have like a saturation of occurrence. So it's like this model of expectation. So in the first figure in the left, we have the movement of one species, and from one square to another, and we have also a new record. And if this new record, from the new record and the old record, we have another movement, so we have new sites with records, and this keep going until we reach some asymptotic curve, like in the figure in the right side. But that this is the expectation. Sometimes the growth, or there is a limit of growth, and we have this kind of saturation, but it's not happened. So if we analyze, for example, some invasive species around the world, we can see that we have exponential rising of species. This map can show the number of occurrences of invasive alien species we recorded, and there are many records, and the expectation is that we have a mean double time of 14 years across the Earth for these species we recorded. So 178 invasive alien species here in this map. And what is the problem of this double time of 14 years? So we can expect that the increase of occurrence also increase the impacts of invasive species. So we have many kinds of attributes these species can present, and they are related to physiological characteristics, but also they are very adaptive to different environmental conditions. So if we look at the climate change scenarios, for example, we can see that the process of brownification or acidification in fresh waters may increase the invasibility of some submerged invasive alien species or non-native plants, for example. Here we can see in the graphs that the invasive alien species has more biomass, for example, when we have the scenario of brown water. And also we have here in the right side native competitors that decrease the biomass in brown water. So in this case, when we have a change in the environment and the brownification process, so we have a reduction of competition, and these can favor the invasive alien species in this case. So this climate change scenario will favor invasive alien species. But it not happens only with brownification, the acidification of fresh waters, but also with when we think about eutrophication and the increase of CO2 in the atmosphere. The increase of CO2 in the atmosphere also can affect CO2 in the fresh waters. If we have an increase in CO2 in the atmosphere, also the CO2 can increase the dissolution in water, and we have water enriched with this gas. So in this case, we performed an experiment to evaluate this situation in the future scenario. And we can see in the black squares here that in all the cases, in all situations, we have the invasive alien species with more number of lateral branches, and it happens also to biomass. And this means that independent of the situation, the invasive species can stand, and particularly in eutrophic condition, the invasive species can resist to eutrophication. And if we have a scenario of increasing CO2 in the water and acidification of fresh water, but not regarding here organic carbon, but inorganic carbon, we have like facilitation here. You can see that in eutrophic condition, the invasive species has a greater number of lateral branches, but it increases more when we go to the eutrophic condition with an addition of CO2. So it's like the CO2 ameliorate the situation and increase the number of branches. It is a really important measure because the lateral branches in an invasive species, like some plants, macrophytes, it is a metric of a spread. So we can see if the plant will have some facilitation in the spread or not in future scenarios. So here, in this condition, we can see that, yes, we can have this kind of facilitation in future scenarios. But this is a kind of limitation or facilitation related to the conditions, physical, chemical conditions of the water. But also we have species that change completely the ecosystem. And once spread, the species start to grow. And here we can see an example of grass that start grow on the shorelines and can fill the channel of the river, for example, and change the whole channel and can prepare new areas to colonize and so on. So this kind of species we call ecosystem engineering species that can create novel ecosystem, basically that support the growth of the species. We can see this, for example, it is an African grass, that you can see here the limits of the original river, and now how the species grew and changed the water course. And this species is found here in Brazil, but also in other places around the world. But the importance here is not only the species per se, but how the species work in the environment to transform it. And this also will cause other kinds of ecological impacts, like, for example, the decrease in species richness. So the biological invasion increase, the ecosystem is changed by this kind of species, and then we have a decrease here in species richness. We evaluate, for example, reservoirs or artificial lakes and also natural lakes. And independent of the type of ecosystem, the invasive species start to grow and can reach values of biomass that prevent other species to grow together. So we have this decrease of species richness, but also if we evaluate the functional aspect of these species, we can have also functional richness decreasing with the increase of the invader. So this is a typical case we are studying, and also this kind of process lead to homogenization of the ecosystems and the community. So if we have this kind of colonization, aggressive, then we can have these other effects. Here we evaluate before and after invasion to see if the impact of the invasion was significant, considering other environmental factors that could decrease also the species richness. But we can see that indeed we have a decrease after the invasion. And it is not only in species richness of native plants here, but also the ecological uniqueness. It means, for example, that some species that occur in one site don't occur in another site. So this is what we call here uniqueness. So these species are lost, and we can have a more significant decrease if we evaluate the effect of time. So in this case, these species can change the ecosystem, like change the water course, prepare the ecosystem to continue grow, homogenize the ecosystem functioning, and also decline the biodiversity. So I think this, when we talk about biological invasion, we are talking about a serious problem that we can face, and we need to face together with climate change, environmental fragmentation, and other issues we have in freshwaters. So this is what we have before the process of invasion in the places we studied. And so here we can see more species, floating ones, that probably are invaders outside Brazil, for example. We know that we have many of these species invading other places around the world. And this is the same place after the invasion. So 10 years after the invasion, we can see this. It's like a football place. And it's incredible how fast the plant can grow. So here we have many changes associated to biological invasions. And these changes associated to biological invasions are mostly regarding changes in biodiversity. So changes in biodiversity are also important, and because if we take a look in the picture, we can see that there is an homogenization, but species lost can affect the functioning of this ecosystem also. And we can expect, for example, that these changes in biodiversity could be worsened if we have species invasion. So we evaluate, for example, a scenario of decrease or increase in biodiversity, just to see how the biodiversity increase or decrease can affect the functioning of aquatic ecosystems. And we can see that if we have biodiversity loss, we can have a decrease, for example, in individual ecosystem functions, like the graph at the right side, graph C. And also we have multiple ecosystem functions that we have decrease if we lost biodiversity, and also ecosystem stability. So we manipulate the richness of microphytes in these scenarios to evaluate this, and we find that this is an important role of biodiversity. And this also is a similar effect that we find when we introduce invasive alien species in the ecosystem. We have the potential to reduce the biodiversity. So when we reduce the biodiversity, we have this kind of effects. So less stability, less individual ecosystem function, and multiple ecosystem function. We are calling here as ecosystem multifunctionality. Taking this together, we try to evaluate if this is possible indeed. And using a data set of tropical lakes over 16 years of monitoring program, we evaluate how non-native or invasive alien species of fish cause these changes. Right? So we evaluated native and non-native fish. And we can see in this graph that we have a decline of diversity. And in this case, we are evaluating beta diversity. So how the species are distributed in space and time. So if we look at the lines here, we can see that all the lines are decreasing. So if we have an increase in the spread of non-native species, we have a decrease in the spread of native species. So we can see the change if we take a look in the small graph inside the other one, that we have a green line and the red line crossing. The green line is the invasive alien species and the native are the red one. And we can see that when we have an increase in non-native species or invasive alien species, native species start decreasing. And this change particularly affected how the ecosystem function. So here we have increases in invasive alien species richness, biomass, and distribution. And this led to decrease in species richness, native ones, biomass, and beta diversity. And as an effect in ecosystem level, we can see that we found a decrease in decomposition rates and also a decrease in productivity rates. So we decrease the potential of this ecosystem to process these phases of the metabolism of this ecosystem. So in this case, we have the invasion of some alien species, and this caused biodiversity loss, and in turn, it caused changes in ecosystem function. So these are some of the impacts, ecological impacts we have, but also we have economic impacts if we take this together. So biological invasion can cause damage to environmental integrity, but also it costs to prevent or to try to restore process of restoration in freshwater ecosystem, for example. And here we have a graph that show biological invasion as one of the most costly damage compared to other natural disasters, for example, storms, earthquake, floods, droughts, and so on. So the damage that biological invasion cause are high. And also this damage depends on the continent, on the region, but independent of the region, we can see that there is a high cost when we are talking about damage caused by biological invasion. So I think with this, we can agree that biological invasions affect ecologically the ecosystems, but also these can cause some economic and social problems if we consider, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, like I showed to you. And we can see that the world we created is a natural condition. And now we need to try to change this condition. So the world we created is not the planet we want. So the planet we want is a balanced planet. So we need a healthy ecosystem. But to have this healthy ecosystem, we need to take actions together. So not isolated actions, but many actions. So here I included some. For example, if we increase protection and restoration of freshwater ecosystem and biodiversity, we can mitigate effects of climate change because biodiversity can maintain the ecosystem functioning. And this can affect or mitigate climate change. So it happens to control climate change. In this way, we need to accelerate actions to fight against climate change. And these fights, together with biodiversity protection, can stabilize ecosystem and can prevent the invasive species to find an altered or a changed environment. So with this environmental protected, we can have less invasive species, or at least the physiological filter can be enhanced, and the biological invasions can face more difficult conditions to stabilize. So also, if we still have some invasive species, we can eliminate, minimize, reduce, or try to mitigate some impacts to combat these invasive species. So if we take this together, we can try to imagine that we have a possibility to control invasions and also control climate change and have biodiversity protection. Why we need to do this is to keep the healthy ecosystem, because when we keep the healthy ecosystem, especially freshwater ecosystems, we can have, for example, ecosystem services. We can receive these ecosystem services. For freshwater, I used here some examples like water quality improvement, wildlife habitat, fish, so we can have food in this case, and so on, recreation, mitigation of floods. We have many kinds of ecosystem services that are provided by freshwater environments. And biological invasions can prevent many of these services if we consider that biological invasion changes ecosystem and also change the biodiversity. So biological invasion is preventing these ecosystem services to happen. So here we have a call to people because people need the freshwater biodiversity and can help to preserve this biodiversity. So in a paper, recent paper, we can see that we have the trajectory of a global freshwater biodiversity decline. We have some biodiversity crisis, and if we take actions of a recovery plan, for example, we can change this trajectory and have healthier ecosystems. So if we don't take actions, then we can see the biodiversity decline keep going. The main actions authors include here is related to water quality, to protection, to management, and I marked here the prevention and the control of species invasion. So it is a global challenge. Take this action, prevent and control invasive alien species, because it also depends on governmental policies and international policies. So it's not so easy to do that, but we can try to figure out how we can prepare some local policies and regional policies, national policies, and then achieve an international policy maybe. Invasive species are a topic of high priority in these global actions. If we are working with biological invasions in freshwater, so we are working with many aspects of the conservations and sustainable development goals. For example, the goal 6, the target 6, where we have the protection and restoration of water ecosystem, and this is one of the main topic to work, I think, because the freshwater should be protected. Then we have safe drinking water, but we can see the improvement of water quality is a target. And this improvement is regarding, for example, avoid eutrophication, pollution, or reduce as maximum as possible. And this also will prevent invasions, because we will have more natural conditions, and this is a scenario that imposes difficult to invasions. So this is one of the targets, but also we have invasive species appearing in another sustainable development goal, the target 15. We have 15.8, prevent invasive alien species on land and in water ecosystem. So this is a clear preoccupation of global researchers and people that are engaged to sustainable development, and invasive species are linked to this kind of priority. And here we can see that control or eradication is and the identification of priority species is one of the targets. And also we have the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the target 6 in this global biodiversity framework, that is related to biological invasion. So to summarize, I think it's more than clear that biological invasions are important topic, and is related to biodiversity and is related to ecosystem functioning, for example. In this figure, we can see in yellow arrows some negative impacts. Green arrows, we can see some impacts there that have positive feedbacks, and blue ones that has relation to ecosystem services. So here we have some freshwater interactions related to biodiversity and ecosystems. So if we keep biodiversity protected, avoid ecosystem alterations, and try to mitigate the effects of biological invasions, we can have better ecosystem services, a healthy freshwater ecosystem, but also to get this, we need to take a look at the risks for the country, each country we are living, and see what are the risks we have in each country, and try to develop policies that can increase opportunities or new opportunities to get better environmental conditions. So we need some new technologies, we need actions of climate mitigation, but also we need conscientious consumption. So people need to be involved in this process, not only researchers, but all the people in schools, the child at home, any level of education, and companies and so on. So we have just one planet for everyone, and we need to also work together in this perspective. And when we talk about biological invasions, particularly in freshwater, we are not far from this scenario. We also are included here. And if we take a look in the left side, the below one, we have the increase in biological invasion with a fish in the yellow circles as one of the risks for countries. So biological invasion is integrated in these topics around the world. So I hope my talk could, how can I say, instigate you to some questions, and I'm available to discuss anything you can have some curiosity here. Thank you for listening. Here's my email if you need to talk with me.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was very, very interesting. We have some questions in the chat. Maybe I can start with that ones. We have a question that I will begin with that one because it helps to understand all of the talk. That is, Chris asked, how do you define invasive? Because all species always moved across regions.
Okay, so how I define invasive? We can have it's a large debate, but we can have, for example, the alien species, invasive alien species. So this kind of species, that one that we take the species in the original place and transport this species to a new place. For example, from Brazil to Europe. So this species is an alien species. And then this species can start to grow and spread. And if this species spread and become dominant, usually we call this species as an invasive alien species, because the characteristic of rapid spread is rapid growth, fast growth is what we expect from invasive species. But also we can have native invasive species. For example, when you have a dominance of a native species, we have no competition, no herbivory or no predation, so and many or plenty of food. So this scenario will promote the growth of this species. So this species can become dominant. So the term used also could be used to the native ones, invasive native species. Of course, we have some debate about how to use the terms, but the term invasive is related to this kind of growth, and alien or native from the origin of this species.
Okay, thank you. So we have two questions from Shmo. I'm sorry if I didn't mention your name right. He says, I understand eutrophication, creation dangers and risks for climate and for climate balance. I want to ask you what, according to you, needs to be an effective way for reduction eutrophication.
How? You mean how we can get this reduction?
Yes, an effective way to reduce.
Yeah, I think the effective way would be the reduction of. I think in the problem that is the increase in nutrient loadings in the freshwaters. So if we reduce this nutrient loading, or of course we can avoid the wastewater to enter the freshwater system, then we can have a reduction of eutrophication process because we don't have the increase of nutrients. So that is the effective way. But in practical terms, to do that, we need policies that must be followed. And that's here in Brazil, for example, we have this kind of problem. People don't or can't release the wastewater, for example, with no treatment in the fresh waters. But when we are in the field, we can see that there are some places that it happens. So I don't know why, but some people just don't mind about this. And so it's really hard to reduce the eutrophication if we think about how policies are effective, because we need the people to do this process, to evaluate, to monitor places and check if the rules are followed. So although we know scientifically what is needed, in practical terms, I think it's a bit difficult if people don't collaborate and have the conscience to this need.
Yeah, so this goes in line with the next question from the same person that asks how governments and authorities can support the reduction of eutrophication process.
Yeah, we are having a good experience here that we are working with people from the chemical engineering and from the Itaipu Reservoir, so the hydroelectric power company, in the shorelines have some farms that also contribute to the entrance of nutrients in the main lake of the hydropower reservoir. And we together planned a kind of a filter that can help the farmers to, for example, try to clean the wastewaters, and it is accessible. So we print the parts of the filter in the 3D printer and prepare the filter with low cost. And the company is supporting the research, but also is supporting the farmers to use these kind of elements in the farms to reduce the entrance of nutrients in the lake. So it is kind of an initiative that helped, I think. So we can integrate society, academy, and also companies in this process. I think it's an interesting way.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other question? You can also speak, and no need to put it in the chat. Or you can raise your hand. So we have another question here in the chat from Tan. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. My question is, in cities, the newly created artificial lakes or ponds can be fast dominated by the invasive species and become the local biodiversity. What should we do in this situation?
Interesting question. I mean, it's interesting because we have here in Maringá, the city where I work, a typical situation that we have a lake in the city, artificial one, and people love the place and go around during day, night, and the local biodiversity is in freshwater. It's mostly invasive species of fish, and when we carried out a monitoring program, we found that some native species have been lost because the invasive species were growing. And we prepared a management plan, starting with like a biomanipulation to remove the invasive species from the freshwater and try to start a process of recolonization of the native ones. And wow, that was incredible how people reacted. And it was like, we hate this kind of researchers. They are removing fish from the water, and they are dumping fish, and people could eat this fish. And anyway, we have many kinds of comments, no sense ones, because as the lake is inside the city and we have many cars and buildings close to the place, we found, for example, heavy metals in the sediment and also in fish. So we can't use this fish for food. And but people don't care about the explanation. So it's difficult to say that scientifically this is the best thing to do. So remove the fish, wait for the recolonization, monitor, and like a long-term project of biomanipulation. And the thing here is that this situation is really, how can I say, it's kind of a difficult situation. It's a sensible situation. If we work between the science and society, and you need to prepare, you need to conduct the project in scientific ways, but at the same time, you need to translate everything to society, and if society does not understand, you need to try again. Otherwise, the society become an disadvantage to the project, and the politicians start to not funding and so on, and the place continue with the biological invasions. So it's not an easy task. But we did that, and it was interesting because the species start to recolonize, and the lake is healthier, and people now started to see that wait some time is also a good thing.
Yeah, I think that problem is general, because here in Portugal we also have a lot of ponds, city ponds, and people add fishes, invasive species there because they think they are beautiful, and if we try to remove it, they will add it again. So yeah. We have here another question. I agree that non-scientists struggle to understand the issues of non-native species. Do you think that governments should be putting aside some funding for educating general public on these issues and investing in citizen science?
Yeah, I think it is an urgent need that the government invest in this kind of practice. And at least here we are starting to have some funds directly related to this kind of practice. So trying to educate people is not an easy task also, but we need to prepare or to have a working group, a multidisciplinary one, that we can join people working in the field, working at the lab, and also going to the schools and go to the society directly, work with politicians, and this kind of multiplicity of issues. I think it's the best way to prepare a working group to fight these actions related to biological invasions, for example.
Thank you. Anyone has any other questions? So I think they are all. Oh, Andra, Carolina, do you have any question? Maybe not. Okay, so I would like to thank Roger again for coming, and all of you that registered for this webinar. I hope you enjoy it. Ponderful, I forgot to say at the beginning, but Ponderful is a project that is investigating the potential of ponds as nature-based solutions. And we are investigating their potential for ecosystem service, protection of biodiversity, and climate change mitigation. You can find more about our work in our social media, so Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Check that, and if you want to see again this webinar, it will be available on YouTube as well. Thank you all, and I hope to see you in the next webinar.